I never imagined I'd find myself in this place, writing about the unraveling of my marriage on what feels like an online confessional. But here I am, seeking a kind of catharsis as I go through the most tumultuous chapter of my life. My name is Mike, and I was married to Sarah for nearly 10 years. To the outside world, we were the quintessential couple, young professionals, nice house in the suburbs, and a golden retriever named Max. But behind closed doors, things started to change. Initially, I noticed little things. Sarah becoming more distant, spending late nights working at the office, and a sudden obsession with her appearance. I shrugged it off, convincing myself that maybe she was just going through a phase or dealing with some work-related stress. It was easy to dismiss the nagging feeling that something was off, especially when I'd come home to her lively laughter echoing through the house, even when I was there. But then, everything shifted. I started to find small clues, her phone buzzing at odd hours, texts she'd forgotten to delete. I wasn't the suspicious type, but every time I would ask about her day, her responses felt rehearsed, like I was talking to a stranger rather than my wife. Then there were moments I'd catch her staring off into space, as if she were lost in some secret thoughts that didn't include me. It was one weekend when it all came crashing down. I had planned a surprise dinner, thinking it would rekindle the spark. I remember walking into the kitchen, the aroma of her cooking wafting through the air, but as I turned the corner, my heart sank. There she was, laughing, flirting even, with our financial advisor, Tom. They stood too close together, their eyes locked in a way that felt intimate. My stomach twisted, and I felt the ground shift beneath me. At first, I thought I had misunderstood. Sarah was just being friendly, right? I tried to brush it off, but my gut was screaming. I decided to dig a little deeper, and boy, did I uncover a web of lies. I went through her phone when she was in the shower, an act I never thought I'd stoop to. What I found shattered me, messages and pictures that left no doubt about their affair. Tom, the guy I had trusted to help us with our financial goals, was sleeping with my wife. It felt surreal, like I was living in a nightmare, waking up to a reality that was too painful to face. Confronting Sarah was the most surreal experience of my life. I can still recall how she froze when I laid out the evidence. The disbelief was palpable, her expression shifting from shock to anger. "You went through my phone. You're pathetic," she screamed, deflecting instead of owning up to her betrayal. I demanded answers and was met with a wall of denial, excuses, and the classic line, "You just don't understand what I've been going through." As if that justified cheating on me with the very man we trusted with our finances. I felt my anger boil over, but beneath it all was a deep-seated sadness. I thought we had built a life together, the kind of love that survived the test of time. But this, no marriage could withstand a betrayal like that. I was left grappling with the emotional fallout, shock, anger, despair. It was all there, swirling in a chaotic mess. Some days felt like I was drowning in a sea of disbelief, while others brought clarity. I realized I had to take control of my life and my finances. Sarah had been the one managing our investments, but now I knew I couldn't trust her judgment. I decided then and there to take the reins back, not only for my financial future but for my emotional well-being too. This was a pivotal moment for me, a moment where I could feel the weight of betrayal transforming into a spark of determination. I had a decision to make. Would I wallow in the pain, or would I chart a new course for my life? Little did I know, the journey ahead would lead me to a path of revenge that I never thought I'd consider. But first, I needed to figure out my next steps. I was done being the victim. It was time to take control. As I sat there in the aftermath of the confrontation with Sarah, a whirlwind of thoughts rushed through my mind. The betrayal felt like a heavy weight on my chest, but beneath that weight was a flicker of determination. I knew I had to take action, not only to regain my sense of self, but to ensure I wouldn't be left in a vulnerable position. The first thing I did was start diving into our finances. I never really paid much attention to the spreadsheets, the investment accounts, and the financial jargon that Sarah had always handled. But now it felt like a matter of survival. I opened my laptop and began to dig into everything I could find. I was amazed at how much I didn't know, how much she had kept from me. I pulled up our investment accounts, scrutinizing every line item. It was like unraveling a mystery. I discovered that Sarah had made some risky investments and incurred losses that we never discussed. I also noticed several transactions to common places we frequented but at odd hours, and it dawned on me that these were likely dinners with Tom. The anger began to boil again, but I pushed it aside. I needed to think strategically, not impulsively. While I was researching our finances, I also began to formulate a plan. My instinct wanted revenge, but the more rational part of me wanted to ensure that I emerged from this situation intact. I couldn't let Sarah have the upper hand. After all, she was the one who had betrayed me, and I was determined to make sure she understood the consequences of her actions. I decided to consult with a lawyer to understand my options. I reached out to a friend who had been through a tough divorce, and he recommended someone he trusted. The lawyer was sharp and straightforward, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil swirling in my heart. We discussed everything from asset division to alimony, and I learned a lot during that meeting. It was empowering to know that I had options and I could protect myself. With my newfound knowledge, I began to think about how to execute my plans without tipping Sarah off. I started to keep my finances separate, opening a new bank account and transferring my salary there. I also began to document everything: conversations, texts, financial statements. I wanted to ensure that I had a clear record should it come to that. I even started to research how I could liquidate some of our joint investments and move that money into my account discreetly. I'll be honest, the planning became almost a distraction from the emotional turmoil I was feeling. Every time I opened the laptop and began working on our accounts, it felt like I was wrestling back my power. I felt like a different version of myself, stronger, more self-reliant. But at the same time, the emotional pain was still there, lurking beneath the surface. As the weeks went by, the tension in the house became almost unbearable. Sarah would walk around with this false sense of normalcy, acting like everything was fine. Every time I looked at her, my heart would clench with hurt and anger. I wondered if she felt any guilt at all. It was hard to see her pretending like nothing had changed, while I was dying inside. One evening, I found the courage to confront her about her betrayal one more time. I had gathered my thoughts and decided it was time to lay it all out on the table again. Sarah, I can't keep pretending like this is okay. You cheated on me with someone I trusted, our financial advisor. How do you think that's going to affect us? Her response was not what I expected. Instead of acknowledging the weight of her actions, she snapped back. "You're making this all about you. You never cared about me or what I was going through." I was taken aback. She was deflecting, as always, and it made me question if she even understood the enormity of her actions. I realized then that she was lost in her own world of excuses, and it was futile to expect any kind of remorse. I couldn't keep trying to pull her back to reality when she was clearly happy living in her bubble of denial. It was in that moment I made a mental note to cut ties and focus on my own recovery. I had no interest in salvaging a relationship with someone who didn't respect me enough to own her actions. I was ready to turn the page, but it would take more than emotional closure. I needed to ensure that my financial future remained secure, and Sarah wouldn't be able to drag me down with her any longer. That realization sparked a fire inside me. I felt like I was finally reclaiming my life, one decision at a time, and I wouldn't allow anyone, especially not Sarah, to dictate my future. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready for whatever came next. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself entrenched in this duel. Life, on the surface, everything appeared normal in the house, but beneath the facade, I was plotting my way out of this nightmare. I had grown increasingly adept at hiding my intentions from Sarah. I spent hours meticulously researching investment strategies and learning how to manage my finances effectively. I also continued to document everything meticulously. I had a folder on my computer titled Evidence, and every text, email, and financial statement I could find went into that folder. I became obsessed with creating a paper trail that would protect me in case things escalated. If Sarah thought she could carry on without consequences, she was in for a rude awakening. One late evening, I found myself at the kitchen table, poring over the account statements again. I was looking for any discrepancies, any sign of Sarah's deception. That's when I noticed something odd, a large withdrawal from our joint account that had occurred about a month back. It was enough to raise eyebrows, and my gut instinct told me it was linked to her affair. I decided to do some digging. I called the bank the following day and managed to get a printout of the transaction history. 2. My shock, it was a payment to a luxury hotel downtown, one that I recognized from conversations Sarah had with her friends. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. She had been spending our money on a romantic getaway with Tom. I felt an icy rage wash over me. This wasn't just betrayal, it was financial betrayal on top of everything else. With this new information, I knew I had more leverage than ever. I started formulating a new strategy, not just to get back at Sarah but to protect myself and my investments. I made a bold decision. I would confront both Sarah and Tom in public, laying it all bare before them. I wanted Sarah to see the consequences of her choices and ensure Tom understood that he was not going to walk away unscathed either. I reached out to a mutual friend, Jenna, who worked at a nearby bar, and arranged for a casual get-together. I invited Sarah under the pretense of wanting to clear the air, while I made sure Tom would also show up. My heart raced as I plotted the scene. I wanted to catch them off guard, to see the expressions on their faces when they realized that I knew everything. The day of the confrontation finally arrived, and I felt a mix of nerves and anticipation. I arrived early to the bar, ordering a drink as I waited for them to show. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I sat at a corner table watching the door. When Sarah walked in, followed closely by Tom, I felt an adrenaline rush. They were laughing, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to hit them. I stood, and as they approached the table, I gave them both a steely look. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but filled with an intensity that surprised even me. They exchanged looks, confusion etched on their faces. "Mike, what's going on?" Sarah asked, feigning innocence. I slid over the bank statements and the hotel receipts, watching their faces turn pale as the reality sunk in. "You want to explain this to me?" I asked, my tone cold. Sarah's expression shifted from surprise to anger. "You went through my things," she snapped, her voice rising. "Not just your things, Sarah, our things. You thought you could cheat on me and steal from our joint account without consequences." I shot back, my emotions bubbling to the surface. Tom, who had been silent until that moment, tried to defend himself. "Mike, this isn't what it looks like." I cut him off. "Oh, spare me the excuses, Tom. You were supposed to be helping us build a future, not tearing apart my marriage." The tension in the room was palpable, and I could see Sarah scrambling for a way to shift the blame back onto me. "You don't understand what I was going through. You were never there for me." I felt a wave of disgust wash over me. "You want to talk about being there for you? How about the years I spent building a life for us, only for you to throw it all away for a fling? You were the one who chose this path, not me." The confrontation escalated, and it became clear that the facade of our perfect marriage was crumbling in front of their eyes. I felt a sense of power in that moment, knowing I was taking control of the narrative. I wasn't just some victim, I was standing my ground. As the confrontation reached its peak, I saw a flicker of vulnerability in Sarah's eyes, perhaps a hint of realization of what she had sacrificed. But then she hardened again, shifting back into defensiveness as if it was a protective shield. "Whatever, I don't need this," she spat, turning to leave with Tom, but I stopped her with one last line. "You should think about how this will affect everything you have. You're not walking away unscathed." With that, they left, leaving me in the bar feeling a mix of triumph and sadness. I had confronted them both, exposed their betrayal, and owned my narrative. But the emotional toll was still significant. I realized that while I had taken a major step in reclaiming my power, the journey was far from over. In that moment, I knew I had to follow through with my plans. I wouldn't just walk away. I would ensure that Sarah felt the full weight of her choices. It was time to take decisive action on all fronts. I was done being the victim. It was time for my revenge to truly unfold. Following the confrontation at the bar, I felt like I had tapped into a new sense of purpose. I knew it was time to take the next steps in my plan, not only to protect my financial future, but also to assert my independence from Sarah and her reckless choices. The emotional aftermath of that evening was heavy, but it was also liberating. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my own life. In the days that followed, I focused on preparing for what I knew would be the inevitable fallout. I hired a lawyer, Lisa, who specialized in divorce and asset division, and we started mapping out a strategy. Our first meeting was eye-opening. She laid out the ins and outs of what to expect during the process, and it was a mixture of overwhelming and empowering. She explained how we could go after all the assets and investments that would be affected by Sarah's betrayal, especially since I had evidence of her misconduct. We also discussed the potential for spousal support, considering the financial implications of my wife's affair. The thought of asking for support almost made me feel guilty, but I quickly pushed that aside. This was about ensuring I would be left high and dry while she continued to manipulate the situation to her advantage. As I worked with Lisa, I started to reflect on my own strengths. I realized that I had always been the one who kept our financial decisions afloat, while Sarah had become more and more reliant on others, particularly Tom. I felt a sense of resolve wash over me. I would not only secure my financial stability, but also rebuild my life as a single man. One evening, while I was going through the financial documents Lisa had asked me to gather, I received a text from Sarah. "Can we talk? I think we need to clear the air." I felt my pulse quicken. After everything that had happened, I wasn't sure what she expected to accomplish. But curiosity got the better of me, so I agreed to meet her at a nearby cafe. As I sat across from her at the small table, I could sense the tension in the air. Sarah looked disheveled, her makeup slightly smeared and her eyes tired. I realized this was probably the first time she had seen the repercussions of her actions reflected back at her. "Mike," she started, her voice shaky, "I know I messed up." For a fleeting moment, I considered the possibility of genuine remorse. But then she continued, "I was unhappy. You were always so focused on work and I felt alone. I didn't mean to hurt you." I couldn't help but scoff. "You didn't mean to hurt me. You cheated on me with our financial advisor. You used our money to fund your affair. How can you act like this is all just a misunderstanding?" She sighed. "I know it sounds bad, but it was a moment of weakness. Tom listened to me when you didn't. I thought I was having an affair with someone who cared. I regret it, I really do." I looked into her eyes, searching for any sign of truth. "Do you regret the affair or do you regret getting caught?" She hesitated, and in that brief moment I knew. This isn't about reconciliation, Sarah. You crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. Her words poured out in an attempt to sway me, but I was adamant. "I've already started the process of moving on. I'm not going to waste time hoping you'll change." The conversation shifted into a defensive mode, with Sarah attempting to justify her actions and manipulate the narrative. But I held firm, refusing to let her guilt trip me. I had come too far to be swayed by empty promises and half-hearted apologies. After that meeting, I committed myself to fully embrace my new life. I started reaching out to friends I had neglected over the years. I began to reconnect with people who had been supportive, who could help me through this transition. I started exercising again, joined a local gym, and even took up a few hobbies I had put on hold. It felt good to reclaim these parts of myself that had been overshadowed by Sarah's presence. But the most important part of my journey was investing in my own financial education. I dived into books and online courses about investing and personal finance. I wanted to ensure that I would never be caught off guard again. This education was not just about financial mastery. It was about empowering myself and reminding myself that I was capable of standing on my own 2 feet. One day, while scrolling through my accounts, I found a particularly promising investment opportunity, one that I was sure would pay off. The thrill of making my own financial choices without Sarah's influence was exhilarating. I felt like I was finally gaining my independence back, which fueled my resolve even more. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. I was ready to officially file for divorce. I met with Lisa again, and together we prepared the necessary paperwork. The process was straightforward, and with each signature I placed, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. This was not just a legal action. This was my declaration of freedom. As I walked out of the lawyer's office, I realized that I wasn't just saying goodbye to my marriage. I was also saying goodbye to the version of myself that had allowed Sarah's choices to dictate my happiness. I was stepping into a new chapter of my life, one where I would be the architect of my own destiny. With the divorce filed, I felt a mix of anxiety and exhilaration. I knew that the legal battle ahead could get messy, especially with Sarah fighting tooth and nail to protect her interests. But I was prepared. I'd taken my time, gathered my evidence, and sought professional guidance. I would not let her manipulate me or take advantage of my kindness any longer. As I moved forward, I found a renewed sense of clarity. I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, determined to emerge victorious. I had taken control of my life, and I was ready for the next phase of my journey, whatever that might entail. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings, negotiations, and emotional upheaval. I was in the thick of it now, facing the reality of divorce head-on. Sarah had hired a lawyer of her own, and I could sense her determination to fight for every penny she believed she deserved, even if it came at the expense of our shared history. The first court date arrived, and I felt a mix of nerves and resolve. I sat in the waiting area, watching other couples who looked just as anxious as I felt. I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come since the confrontation at the cafe. The Mike who had walked into that bar, blindsided by betrayal, was a different person from the one sitting there now. I was stronger, more self-assured, and ready to stand my ground. When my name was called, I stepped into the courtroom, my heart pounding in my chest. The atmosphere was tense, and I could see Sarah seated across the room, her expression a mixture of defiance and uncertainty. I felt a surge of determination wash over me. This was my moment to assert myself, to show her that I wouldn't be pushed around any longer. The judge walked in, and the proceedings began. My lawyer laid out the case, presenting evidence of Sarah's infidelity and the financial discrepancies I had uncovered. I could feel the weight of the evidence backing me up, the texts, the hotel receipts, and the bank statements all painting a clear picture of betrayal. Sarah's lawyer was aggressive, attempting to twist the narrative to portray me as the villain. Mike was hardly present in the marriage, she argued. He spent more time working than nurturing their relationship. Sarah was left feeling neglected and alone, leading to her poor choices. I felt my blood boil, but I kept my composure. I knew better than to let my emotions get the best of me during these proceedings. I had come prepared to counter every single claim thrown at me. When it was my turn to speak, I focused on the facts. I worked hard to provide for us, and I believed we were building a future together, I stated, keeping my tone steady. The choices Sarah made were her own, and they had nothing to do with my commitment to our marriage. I deserved to protect my interests. As the arguments continued, I noticed Sarah's demeanor shifting. She was growing increasingly defensive, her facade beginning to crack as the evidence against her piled up. I felt a sense of satisfaction as I watched her struggle to maintain control. The session ended with the judge calling for a recess, and as I stepped outside, I felt a wave of relief. I was one step closer to reclaiming my life. My resolve was solidified. I wouldn't allow Sarah to walk away without facing the consequences of her actions. The following court dates were equally intense, but each time I felt a growing sense of empowerment. I started to see the effects of my preparation pay off. Lisa, my lawyer, was on my side, and we were building a strong case. With every passing session, the balance of power began to shift. But it wasn't just the legal battle that I was facing. The emotional toll was significant. I had moments of doubt, wondering if I was doing the right thing, if this was truly the path I wanted. The memories of our life together haunted me, and sometimes I found it difficult to separate the Mike I had become from the man who had loved Sarah. One evening, I went for a walk to clear my head. It was a crisp fall night, and the leaves crunched under my feet. I found myself at a small park where we used to walk Max, reminiscing about the simpler times. It was bittersweet. I could see the shadows of our past, but I also knew I had to keep moving forward. In that moment of reflection, I realized that my decision to file for divorce wasn't just about revenge or punishment. It was about reclaiming my life. I had spent years investing in a relationship that had ultimately betrayed my trust. The closure I sought wouldn't come from a courtroom. It would come from finding peace within myself. As the final court date approached, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I was no longer the man who had walked into that bar in disbelief. I was now someone who had faced his past head-on. I was ready to confront Sarah one last time, not only in court but also in my own mind. When the day arrived, I took a deep breath as I walked into the courtroom, ready for the final showdown. I had prepared myself for this moment, and I was determined to see it through. The judge listened intently as both sides presented their closing arguments. When it was my turn again, I spoke with clarity. I loved Sarah and invested my heart and soul into our marriage. Her betrayal shattered that trust. I'm not asking for vengeance, I'm asking for fairness. I've made sacrifices for this relationship, and I believe it's time to protect my interests. The judge nodded, and after what felt like an eternity, a decision was reached. The ruling wasn't perfect, but it was enough to ensure that I would not be left financially devastated. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I had stood my ground and emerged with my dignity intact. As I left the courtroom, I felt lighter. The weight of the past was beginning to lift, and I was ready to embrace the next chapter of my life. In that moment, I realized that I had not only reclaimed my financial stability, but also my self-worth. I was ready to move on, to seek out new opportunities and experiences that awaited me beyond this painful chapter. The journey was far from over, but I was no longer afraid. I had taken control, made my choices, and learned valuable lessons along the way. It was time to focus on my future, and I was ready to step boldly into that unknown territory. With the court ruling behind me, I felt a mixture of relief and resilience. The emotional roller coaster of the past few months had drained me, but I was finally free to move on. I had learned so much about myself, about love, trust, and the importance of standing firm in the face of betrayal. In the weeks following the divorce, I focused on rebuilding my life. I reconnected with old friends, many of whom I had neglected during my marriage, and I spent quality time with my family. Each social interaction reminded me that I was not alone in this journey. I had a support system ready to lift me up. I also took the opportunity to travel, something I had put on hold for years. I booked a trip to the mountains where I could breathe fresh air and reflect on my journey. During that trip, I found myself hiking through the stunning trails, surrounded by nature's beauty. Each step felt like a step toward healing, a chance to shed the weight of my past. I reached the summit one afternoon and sat down to take in the view, feeling the sun warm my face. It hit me then just how much I had grown. The betrayal, although painful, had propelled me into a new chapter, one where I was in control of my life and my happiness. I also took my newfound financial knowledge and applied it to my investments. After months of learning and researching, I began to make informed decisions about my money. I was no longer relying on anyone else to manage my finances. I was taking the reins. It empowered me to know that I was capable of securing my own future. As I settled back into my routine, I also made a promise to myself. I would not let fear or past mistakes dictate my choices moving forward. I wanted to approach relationships with a renewed sense of caution, but also openness. I understood that love could be complicated, but I refused to let one betrayal close my heart forever. That's when I met Jessica. We were introduced by a mutual friend at a small gathering. There was an immediate connection, a spark that felt refreshing. As we chatted, I found myself laughing and enjoying the moment. It had been a long time since I felt that way around someone, and it scared me a bit. But rather than retreating into my shell, I leaned into it. Jessica was kind, intelligent, and engaging. We quickly bonded over shared interests, and I found myself opening up about my past, not as a burden, but as a part of my journey. To my relief, she listened without judgment, offering support and understanding. It was a stark contrast to the emotional games I had endured with Sarah. As our relationship blossomed, I was careful to set boundaries, ensuring that I wouldn't lose myself in someone else. Again, we took things slow, enjoying the process of getting to know each other. I felt a sense of excitement that I hadn't experienced in years. Months passed, and I found myself happier than I had been in a long time. I was embracing life again, investing in my interests and building a future, not just in my finances but in my relationships as well. I was learning to love again, not out of desperation, but from a place of strength and clarity. One evening, as I sat with Jessica on a cozy couch in my living room, I felt content. We shared stories and laughter, the warmth of our connection blossoming effortlessly. In that moment, I realized how far I had come. I had transformed my pain into strength, my betrayal into wisdom. As I reflected on everything that had transpired, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. I had faced the worst of my fears, endured heartbreak, and emerged renewed. The experience had taught me invaluable lessons about trust, about strength, and about the importance of self-worth. I knew that life wouldn't always be smooth sailing, there would be challenges ahead, but I was ready for them. I had taken control of my narrative, and the future was mine to shape. I had become my own advocate, and I was determined not to let fear dictate my choices any longer. As the evening wore on and the sun set beyond the horizon, I felt a deep sense of peace wash over me. I had weathered the storm and come out on the other side, stronger and wiser than ever. I was excited to see what the future held, ready to embrace it with an open heart and an unwavering spirit. The journey was mine, and I was finally ready to live it fully.